to talk about the Besamin Rosh, the Sefer Besamin Rosh. It's a very interesting story. It's a fascinating story. I do need to apologize though. It's a bit like it's a diet drink. It doesn't have a lot of Torah calories per se, but it's interesting and it's it has some. It has some. Yeah. So I want to open with this because it's an important takdama. The Stipler in Kreine de Igerson, his letters in Chelik Gimel. He has a letter as follows, and I want to open with this, even though I don't know that we'll adhere to it perfectly, but it's like a guiding light to keep, I guess, in the foreground as we discuss this. He says, "It's not good to be mefarsim the negativity about the Besamin Rosh," and he gives a few reasons. He says, reason number one is because of his illustrious fathers. Reason number two is it's already 150 years since the story, the Stipler writes, and maybe he already had a kapara. That's reason number two. Reason number three, he says, there's many gedolim that were taken by him, that went along with him, and even if it was an accident, it's embarrassing. And Dalit is kama anoshim yavi rifyin. People might be dejected or come to some sort of negative outcome by realizing that someone who was a gadol b'Torah made grievous errors, grievous errors. So as that's what he ends up. So the Stipler says it's not worth being mefarsim the klayin, the negativity of the Besamin Rosh too much for all these various reasons. Now, many I'm not the Halach Rachel Megala Seid. It's out there. There are many svarim, there are many chuvas, there are many places one could read about this. So I want to use the Stipler's hadrach over here to respectfully discuss it. Meaning, keep in mind all the various elements that the Stipler laid down over here. His illustrious parents, the gedolim who went along with it, he himself being a Talmid Chacham. Keeping all those variables in mind, let's discuss the story of the Besamin Rosh, a little bit about it. It's a fascinating story, fascinating tshuva sefer. And let's, piece it together a little bit. So the Sefer Besamin Rosh, I brought in a copy that was published in the 1970s. At home I have the first edition also. It was only published twice. It's published once in 1792 and once in 1970. It was only published twice. Although it was only published twice, it's widely quoted in the Paiskim. Kveger brings it down several times. The Shos Yaakov quotes it. The Chassam Sofer quotes it. The Chidah quotes him, the Ben Ish Chai quotes him, and many others. That's like a short list, many others. So it was widely read and quoted by many Paiskim. It was published with haskamas from two of the Gedolei Hadar, one the literal undisputed Gadol Hadar, and one Gadol Hadar caliber Talmid Chacham. The one is the Ned Yehuda, who in about 6 months before he was nifter gave a haskama to the Sefer, and the other one is Tzvi Hersh Levine, who was the father of the Mechaber, who was the Rav in Berlin, was also a tremendous Talmid Chacham, very well, much related to the major rabbinic families in Europe at the time. He was the Chacham Tzvi's Einikel, I believe. He was the Yavitz's relative. He was related to the Ned Yehuda, and many other illustrious rabbinic families. Now, this Sefer has a very unique thing about it. It was published in 1792. The name of the Sefer is Besamin Rosh. Now, the reason why it's called Besamin Rosh, the subtitle is Shailas Tshuva Besamin Rosh, HaMiyuchas LaHarosh. That's all. These are Shailas that are Miyuchas to the Rosh. The Rosh was a Rishon who, from the 1300s, who fled Germany and moved to Spain, and is like a crossover Rishon between the German Minhagim and the Sephardim Minhagim, and is really the precursor to the evolution of the Shulchan Aruch, because the Rosh's son was the Torah, who wrote the first kind of synthesis of all the various psakim. Later on, the Shulchan Aruch came hundreds of years later, but followed the same, course of action and updated it, and the Ramah wrote on that, and then the Shnei Kalim, the Sma, and the Taz, the Bach, the Shach, the Magen Avram, they all wrote on that. So really, this is the predicate. The Rosh is the predicate of Kilu normative halacha, how we have it. And what this Sefer claimed to be ostensibly was the Chuvas of the Rosh. Now, it was published by a Yingaman, whose name is Reb Shaul Berlin, Levine. He came from Berlin. His name was Levine. He's the son of Tzvi Hersh Levine. He was a brilliant Talmid Chacham, a prodigious Talmid Chacham, a brilliant man. And he put out the Sefer. Now, what he said, and in the Hakdam of the Sefer he brings this, is that he found a tranche of Ksav Yad, of Kisvei Yadis, like a binder of Kisvei that was sitting somewhere that had been reviewed by one of the obscure Rishonim, by an obscure Rishon, who the Beis Yosef quotes here and there, but it was, found, and the backstory was as follows. Every good, fraud has a backstory. He said that, I forgot the name of who he's quoting. It's in the Hakdamah to the Sefer. But he quotes that, I'll tell you in a second. He quotes that Reb Shaul himself says that he bought it from, an intermediary, how he got it. But then he brings a Hakdamah to the Sefer that's written by the original finder of the Sefer, who says that it's Rabbi Yitzchak di Molina. The Beis Yosef quotes Rabbi Yitzchak di Molina in like two tshuvas. So he's like a contemporary of the Beis Yosef, a Rishon, like a Rishon Achron, like right on the borderline, but not a very well-known person, not someone we have, Svarim from, whatever, who says that he was traveling and he went to Beis Echad HaAshirim. He says, I'll read you a little bit of the thing. He says, "Vayivieni el ha'ir ha'gdela likim l'kedeshim, asher ba'aretz ki l'kedesh Alexandria." They brought me to Alexandria. I was hosted. Beis Hagvir hanichbad imreimim gavishaya digani. He had a major library, which was rare to see at that time. Alexandria was actually famous for its library, in ancient times, but it had a major library. He says, krach gadol, a big, binder of Kisvei Yadis. Ubeshari kvenu piyamatik chuvas harash. And on the binder it said, these are chuvas harash. Ubekari b'itchila hinehu kulei chuvas v'shal harash and etfasim b'shekvar. I read the first 100 pages of it, and these are all rushes, meaning if it's the Molina who's writing this, you have to be a pretty substantial Tam Chacham to open up Ksav Yad and say, oh, yeah, this is the Russian Klal Beis, this is Klal Yud Zayin, this is, So Rabbi Yitzchak di Molina writes that Rabbi Yitzchak di Molina ostensibly writes, this is probably not written by Rabbi Yitzchak di Molina, writes that he went there and he saw the beginning of it was just, famous chuvas from the Rosh. Then he says, Ach leil derech klal prat. It just wasn't the published version the way we have it. It wasn't as organized as the Shot Rush that we have, but it was all the same stuff. When I got to the middle of the Sefer, Matzasi Chuvas Rabbis Heina, Shlebo Adaim B'Tfos, Miksasim Bo Stumas, Leparish Miavin, Miksasim Chasim Ler Rabbeinu Rosh, Yesh Shevachais Mevachim Denagainim Mizmana, Yishal Rosh, that some were signed by the Rosh himself, some signed by contemporary Gainim, some signed by his children, Chuvas in the Rosh that had never been found before, etc. And then he continues on, he writes about different chuvas there, etc. And he says, Mamela, he brought these and he wants to have the opportunity to publish them. This is what Rabbi Yitzchak di Molina says. Now, alas, that was not to be. And Rosh Berlin writes that he wasn't able to, for whatever reason. It fell from one person to another, until it fell into his possession. And he took it home to his home in Berlin. I don't know, I think he was briefly married and divorced. I could be wrong about that, but I think he was briefly married and divorced. He was living back at home with his father, and he brought it home and he began to work on it, to really open it up. And he wrote a beer that runs the whole length of the Sefer called Kased Harsana. The Besamin Rosh are like these mostly short chuvas in the Besamin Rosh that he claims are from the Rosh, that he says Yitzchak di Molina, this claims this whole provenance and trajectory. And then he wrote a Sefer called Kased Harsana where he expounds on the chuvas, and the Kased Harsana is a high, a top tier modern rabbinic sefer. It's something that's quoted widely. People are nana from his svaras. He brings good rayas. He opens up new vistas, new sugyas. It's a proper sefer written, and it's on shuvas that span really Dal Chag Shulchan Aruch, because it's not set on any specific mitzvah. So you're talking about a guy who's in his, I don't know, he's probably in his 40s at that point. He's a big Talmud Chacham. He publishes the sefer. Now the problem is that Rav Shaul Berlin had already been in trouble before this. Before he published the Besamin Rosh under this murky backstory, this mysterious backstory, he had been in trouble before this, and that was as follows. His first sefer that he published, I believe it's his first sefer, it could be published before that, was called Mitzvah Yakzel. Now the sefer Mitzvah Yakzel is a sefer that he wrote to argue on the Teres Yekusiel of Rabbi Fall Hamburger. Rabbi Fall HaKayin of Hamburg was the Rav of Ahu, Altona Hamburg and Weinsbach, or however you pronounce it. This is like primary German cities. And he was a big Kanoi. Rabbi Fall Hamburger, and he wrote a sefer called Teres Yekusiel, which had many different psakim Dal Chag Shulchan Aruch, and a sefer anonymously came out called Mitzvah Yakzel to argue on the sefer Teres Yekusiel, and it argued in an extremely disrespectful and broad, vicious manner. It wasn't done with respect or anything like that. It was meant to tear down the Teres Yekusiel, to tear down Rabbi Fall Hamburger, who was a big Hanoi, to tear down his stature, to tear down the sefer. Now, when the sefer came into Hamburg, where Fall HaKayin was the Marad Astra, they were terribly stricken by it. They were terribly taken aback by it. And the Bezdin of Hamburg passed a rule that the sefer has to be in Cherem and nobody's allowed to learn from it. Now, they weren't happy enough with that, and they decided to send out letters to all the various kehilas throughout Germany and Poland and etc., demanding that other kehilas also enforce the Cherem of Hamburg, of Ahu, and not allow anybody to learn the Sefer Mitzvah Yakzel, because it was a disrespectful Sefer. It was like a Manal Igris of sorts, like a disrespectful Sefer targeting, one of the senior Gedolim of the time. Now, when this Cherem reached Berlin, and it came into the house, the home of the local Rav, Reb Tzvi Ersh Berlin, who knew that the anonymous author of Mitzvah Yakzel was his son, Reb Shaul, and felt that although his son maybe had, pushed the line a little bit or gotten a little too, was out of line a little bit. He was young and he shouldn't have argued so brashly and so with so much confidence. But essentially, this was Kedarka Shel Torah. This was a normal machlekes relating to actual Torah topics, and he deserves a pass. Like, he shouldn't be mamish, ran out of town over this. And because his father, Reb Tzvi Ersh Berlin, was a man of great stature and a Talmid Chacham Muflig and very well connected amongst the rabbinic world, he was able to save Reb Shaul Berlin from being put into Cherem, the Sefer being banned in Gansen. Now, Mitzvah Yakzel also is like a collector's item. Again, not a Sefer that was republished much at all. It's a collector's item and etc. But now, that was in 1788 or 1789. Now, in 1791 or 1792 is when the Besamin Rosh comes out. So Reb Shaul Berlin is already somebody who's kind of a man with a background. Meaning he's already been in trouble by the time the Besamin Rosh comes out. Now, he puts out the Besamin Rosh, and okay, everything's great. It's a beautiful tshuva sefer, very entertaining, very colorful, and many gedolim pick it up and start reading it and learning it, and etc. But as they're perusing the sefer, they notice that there's a good, solid handful of the psakim there that are very, very eye-raising. Now, putting aside the fact that some of them are steerus to rushes, meaning some of them don't stem with a rush elsewhere, like a rush in a Masechta somewhere, and a psak doesn't stem. So now that could sometimes happen, and either you need to be creative and come up with the yishuv, or you have to figure out what takes precedence, meaning when the rush in one place writes like this, and in Klal Psak that happens via Moen when a Mechaber writes many Svarim throughout the span of his whole life, and he's not sitting in the editing house and making sure that everything stems. It is possible that someone at some point said X and then says Y. You need to figure out how to deal with that. So that's half an issue. But what they found is between 10 and 20 very, very questionable psakim, things that very much lent authority to the early Haskalah. This is in the late 1700s in Germany. Reb Shaul Berlin is part of the nascent group of maskilim who are forming in Berlin at the time. People who would later go on to found the Reform movement and General Haskalah and various other branches and versions. And he's close with these people. And in the Sefer, he's sneaking in various themes that are related to early Haskalah desires, and he's claiming them to be from the Rosh, from 1300, from 1350. Meaning and I'll show you some examples soon. Meaning he's taking things that are very modern shilas, where he's not the conservative position, where he's the the chiddush, the haskalitic position, and he's claiming that it's really an old truth from Rosh from hundreds of years ago. That gives it a certain standing that would be very substantial, and that is really where the Paiskim and the Gedolim at the time caught onto it and really sounded the alarm, pulled the fire alarm on the Sefer. Now there's a few smaller, less known people who were involved in it first. But probably the most famous, the primary adversary of Besamin Rosh, the one who really took it to task, was the Ramat Chabanet. Ramat Chabanet is a Hungarian Rav, an Austro-Hungarian Rav. He's a little bit older than Chaim Sefer. Chaim Sefer saw him as a very important person in the area. His Talmud, Yehuda Assad, was a famous Hungarian Paisik. He's a very, very chashuv Hungarian Paisik. And in his Tshuva Sefer called Prashas Mordechai, which was actually republished relatively recently, in Tshuva Hey, he has a long tshuva where he's writing to Reb Shaul Berlin's father, Reb Tzvi Ersh Berlin, trying to get him on board to banning the Besamin Rosh. Now, he brings a bunch of examples, and we'll cover them. Now, what's interesting is that first of all, the Besamin Rosh has Haskam from the Neder Yehuda. Now, Haskam from the Neder Yehuda will get you somewhere. That's not so easy to take away. Haskam from the Neder Yehuda will really get you somewhere. Now, the truth is that the Neder Yehuda was, I want to read you the Haskama. You see clearly, he's mamish on his deathbed. Let me read you and he was on his deathbed. Meaning this is a known thing, the Neder Yehuda was on his deathbed, and there were other people involved at that point of running his house, his son and others, and here, I want to read you. He says, Mechtavi Higiani, Hanaim Bali Yadai, your beautiful note came through, V'yan ki b'avenisenu rabim, v'zeh shloisha chadashim nehiyesi v'nechlesi. These last 3 months, I've been very shvach and sick. I'm teetering. I'm in tremendous danger. Hapam Oidus Hashem Shalayazav Chastoi, Shalach Ezri, Eitziani Menacheli, I survived it. I'm Rafa Koichi, I'm very weak. The other recesses Vaxiva Kasha like. Lachain Asher Bukaitzer Milan Advar Askama. I'll give you a little askama. So Nedviuda clearly is writing that I'm not in the best of health. And the Nedviuda, you could get the date on this. I looked it up once in the past. It's a matter of months. It's a matter of months. It's like 1892. You have to do the exact date. It's a matter of months till the Nedviuda was nifter. So Nedviuda was very elderly, but still, askama from the Nedviuda will get you somewhere. Even elderly, even with an asterisk, even if he was on his deathbed and he writes he's on his deathbed and maybe he didn't go through the entire sefer, cover to cover, and it's askam for the Nedviuda. And this is why the disciple says that, Leman, the covet of the Gedolim, it's askam for the Nedviuda. This will get you somewhere.
Say you can stumble on those.
Maybe, I don't know. This is askam for the Nedviuda stands where it stands. It's something, Additionally, his father, Tzvi Hersh Berlin, who was a tremendous real Gadladar caliber person who corresponded with all the Gedolei Arabanim, was involved in many great shaylas. He was actually very close with the Neder Yehuda. They argued, they agreed, and they argued, and there's letters both ways, but meaning someone who the Neder Yehuda in Chelik Aleph and Chelik Beis corresponds with seriously, meaning taking very seriously his critiques and writing back and forth, meaning we're talking about someone who's a real Gadladar caliber person. He writes a more beautiful haskama for his son Sefer, and then when confronted with the Meram Banet's great bikairis and battle against the Sefer, he writes that the Sefer was in my house for more than 10 years, and I know about the Ksav Yad, it's been here for a long time, and my son's not lying, and he published a whole country. It's called Ish Anav. I read you just the first poetic verses. He writes, Ish Anav le'yiplu panav, a humble man, his face doesn't fall, gamim yevoizu boizu mishpachis, even if they heap embarrassment on his family. Afki Yedea Chesroina, even though he knows his Chesroinis, Ishtek Lalbaina, he'll suffer in silence. Keish Em Befiv Hechachis, as if he has nothing to say to defend himself. Achatas Ne'urav Yechshav Mitzarov, he'll just assume that he's getting punished for areas that he did in the past. It's like a beautiful poetry, and then he brings a three-page like tshuva, a short tshuva defending his son and writing that this was in his house, and his son's a Talmud Chacham, and it's a good sefer, and there's nothing wrong with it. So the Tzvi Hersh Berlin did not back down, and because of that also, kept it somewhat alive. Now, it is quoted a lot in many poskim. In many poskim, there's no asterisks; they just quote it. Reb Shlomo Eger quotes it. Reb Kiva Eger quotes it. The Chasam Sefer, on the other hand, in the first edition of the Chasam Sefer, this has been changed in a lot of editions. The Chasam Sefer has a very interesting play in words. The Chasam Sefer writes for Isi Kizvei Harosh HaChadash. Now, Kizvei, he spells Chaf, Zayin, Vez, Yud. Kazav, lie. Kizvei Harosh HaChadash, the new lie of the Rosh. Meaning it's a play on the word Kisvei. Reisi Bekisvei Harosh HaChadash is on the Nuksavim. Kizvei Harosh, the lies of the Rosh. The Sefer, which is funny because it's tongue-in-cheek, he's quoting him. Meaning he likes it, he's enjoying what he read. He read the Sefer, he enjoys it, it's relevant, it's pertinent to the conversation, but he's well aware of the fact that there's a major tumult, and the Sefer was very close with the Mordechai Benet, and he's aware of what's going on. He writes for Isi Bekizvei Arash. Now later on, there are those who claim that was a mistake, it was just a Taras Hatzfos. The Sefer never meant that, he really meant Kisvei Arash the whole time, the Sefer was taken. L'mashal the Chida in Shem HaGedolim, when he writes about this Sefer, the Chida writes that his father was a big Nemanalai, Aviv Shel Berlin. If he says he saw it and he saw the Kisvei Yad, then he saw the Kisvei Yad, and I have no reason to argue in it. Meaning, there's a certain stature that his father had, and that the Chida bows his head to. Mitzad Sheni, many other Gedolim were strongly opposed. Now they collected a list. Now what's interesting is that this Sefer, this Besamin that I have over here, is published by a guy in Eretz Yisrael. His name is, I forgot his name this second. What's his name? Reuven Amar. It was published, I forgot when. It was actually republished, not republished, but reprinted and sold by Mizrahi in Flatbush, a couple of years ago. That's where I got it from. Thank you. But in the Hakdama, he has a Hakdama called Yafa Besamin. This person, Reuven Amar, where he proves, or attempts to prove, that the Besamin Rosh is fine, and it's not true. It wasn't a forgery. It's really good all along.
Is the entire issue only
those? So there's some who say that it's some and some. It's a mix. So he does all these things, and he actually does interesting things. He collects a whole list of great icons throughout history, who their svarim were attacked when they were originally published, and later on the world came around to realizing that they were amazing. He says, for example, the Rambam, the Ramchal, Others, their svarim were attacked. They didn't receive instant acclaim. It wasn't like everybody said, great sefer, great thing. There was pushback, and Afal Pikain. Later on, the world came around to realizing that it's good, and he says this is no different. Then he quotes all the different chuvas that quoted, for example, like a tremendous amount, like we mentioned briefly. But here, I'll give you like a list over here, a small list over here. The Yeshuas Yaakov, the Chemda Shlema, the Yad David, which is David Simtain, the Shalom Meshiv, the Beis Yitzchak is Richard Shmelkish, the Lev Chaim is Chaim Palachi, the Sameach is Meir Simcha, Krach Sharemi, the Rav Palom is Ben Ashchai, Shalmin Udarim, Terry Tamima is the Aruch HaShulchan's son, Dalia Masechus is the Navardi Karav, Minchas Elazar is the Munkatcher Rebbe, Steichemet is Chizkiyahu Medini, Yaskel Avdi, Hart Tzvi, Kveger. It's like endless who quoted it. So he says that most of them must have understood it to be real. Now, these are not svarim that lend themselves to historical footnotes and to asterisks. If they say a svara, and others have gone through the list, and if you look at each one of these chuvas, they're never coming up with something new from the Besamin Rosh. It's always bolstering an existing svara, or like bringing a raya from something he says. It's never to be semech leim halacha l'maisa on his own. So clearly, many of them saw it that it's a fine work. The Qasad Harsana that he wrote is a top tier sefer. It's a high caliber sefer, although it's not the Rosh. It's a later invention. He says good svaras. He has good rayas. He has what to be meisif to the halachic discourse, even if it's not. Even if it's asterisks. Now, this guy doesn't believe that. This guy believes that it is really real. Most, even Rav Avadi, who gives him haskama to the sefer, doesn't hold that it's real. Rav Avadi, anytime he quotes it, writes that there's a major, question about the provenance. But Afal Pikein, Kabbalah Samas Misha Amra, like, if there's truth there, and you could just, you could benefit from it. Now, I wanted to show you a few of the striking examples of what triggered this major fight. Now, there's nothing unique about this tshuva be'etzem, but I'm just going to read a little bit from a tshuva from Reb Meir Mazuz, a personal favorite of mine. But there's nothing. The tshuva is in Shut Bayis Neman and Chelik Beis, in the Yanim Shainim, in the end of it, in Simon Beis, he has a whole tshuva at the Besamin Rosh. Now, he brings that the Chida was, believed that the Besamin Rosh was real, and he says, Kvedim Kaim Munach, he doesn't think so. He brings all the various rayas, etc. He brings that Reb Tzvi Berlin writes that he saw the Ksav Yad, and he says there's no reason to argue, and that he probably did see the Ksav Yad. It was just written by his son. It wasn't. He probably did see it, a notebook that was laying. I'm not arguing. He's not saying it's not a lie. It's just. And then this is really what got me thinking about it now this season. But we'll work backwards. He says Amna Mashakasav Besamin Rosh Simon Shimon Ches Neged Gzeris Kitnius, and Shuva Shimon Ches the Besamin Rosh writes against Kitnius. Ein Chiddush. Says that one, which other poskim pointed out, Kitnius is a Xera that's going on for a long time. Kitnius is at that point, it's an old Xera, meaning in the Rosh's time, Kitnius wasn't a Xera yet, but later on it certainly was. Says, Ein Chiddush, Shekain Gam Harash V'Ator V'Bein Yerucham Lechash L'Xera Zu. Says that to be true authentically, many Rishonim were in Chayshir, V'Kein Das Again Yavitz, More V'Ksia, I am B'Sifri Hashem Nisi, my Sefer, Gamash Gas Hashem, he brings fine. So he says, that's really what got me started. I thought I saw the Kitnius thing, and but he says the Kitnius one is not such a big taina. Now, I wanted to show you, I have over here a sample. We'll run through it very quickly because I don't want to go too late, but there's just a quick sample of some of the chuvas that sparked the ire of the Moran Benet and others here. So, for example, one of them, in Tshuva Shin, I think it's, one second, I just want to get it here. Here I have a list of 19 of them. Well, some of them will strike you as very troubling, some might not, but they're all various things. It says, for example, he has a heter to be over on Zman Tefillah for someone who's Isaac inside the Satira. In Simon you test, the Besamin Rosh has a tshuva there that if someone's learning Kabbalah, he doesn't have to do Zman Tefillah. Now, I think a lot of people would like that heter, and maybe it could be multiple translations of the word Kabbalah, but again, not Oiskat La'alacha. He says, for example, in Simon Chaf Alpha, is the Chumrah, again, not La'alacha, that about Kari is not allowed to wear tefillin before he went to the mikveh. While Kari didn't go to the mikveh, he's not allowed to wear tefillin. Tshuva Gimel, in Tshuva Lamed Vav, he says, Rabbeinu Tam, he brings a faux tshuva in the name of Rabbeinu Tam. It's not anywhere else in Rabbeinu Tam's tshuvas, as far as I know. Maybe I'm wrong. He brings a faux tshuva in the name of Rabbeinu Tam that says, Yain Nesach B'zman Hazeh is mutter. Because the Goyim don't really know what they're doing. It's Ma'aseh V'Seim B'Yidei, they don't know what they're doing, but Yain Nesach is mutter. Now, it's based on a true story. Rabbeinu Tam in Tosfos in various places, and in Chuvas and Sefer HaYashar, is one who advances some kulas in the sugi of Stam Yenim, of Goyim Stam Yenim. Not in Yayin Nesach, really, and not saying that you could drink the Yayin Nesach. Rabbeinu Tam does advance certain kulas, and so it's based on a true story. And now in this Sefer, in this version, in the back, he has a kuntrish Reach Besamim, and on Chuvas like this, he'll show you every shita that almost holds like this, or that came close to holding like this, to show you that it's not really as outlandish or obscure as you would think it is. Meaning, that's what the job of this this remake of the tshuva is. Now, here's another one. This is a super controversial one. In Siman Mem, he writes that it's mutter to shave your beard on Chol Hamoed. Now, there's a lot to say about that, and the truth is that the Noda B'Yehuda allowed that. The Noda B'Yehuda, in the famous tshuva that actually he argued about with Rebbe Tzvi Shlevin, that was one of the people arguing about it. It's in Madura Kamen, it's in Madura Basra, he revisits it a bunch of times. Noda B'Yehuda writes about it strongly. He's frustrated with the people who are arguing with him. I actually gave a share in a different time. It's interesting tshuva, but it was considered very, very controversial, and even people who knew Mach Erkam Keneged the Noda B'Yehuda, meaning even most people who knew that they were no match for the Noda B'Yehuda, still argued on this and said, even though he's the Gadol Daraf, Pekin is not the Halacha. Now, in Besamin Rosh, in Tshuva Mem, he says that you're allowed to shave your beard on Chol Hamoed. Grad, I think, in the case of the Harsana, in Reb Shaul Berlin's Pirush, he argues on it. So he really hedges. He has you coming both ways. He has the Rosh writing the Kula, saying that it's mutter, and then he argues on it and says that that's not the halacha, and the Torah doesn't hold like that, and the Shem don't hold like that. So it's not interesting how he set that up. In another tshuva in Siman Kuf, he says that someone who doesn't have an arm is pater and tefillin shel Rosh. Again, that's not the halacha, but he brings a daya that he says it's the Rosh saying that he says that someone who's pater doesn't have an arm is pater and tefillin shel Rosh.
What about Tantra?
He doesn't have an arm.
What does he gain by changing the halacha?
Oh, so what he's trying to do is introduce certain, early maskilic ideas. Some of these to us mean nothing, but shaving on Chol Hamoed, for example, was a super, super controversial discussion that was going on then. Being over on Zman Tefillah was a thing that was relevant. These were things people were fighting about. Some of them you'll see more. I'll find you a few more. For example, he says that a person can be Mekayim Puru outside the confines of a marriage. That's, seems halachic, arcane, right? Not relevant l'maisa, but it could be relevant l'maisa, and it's very pertinent if that's the milieu, if that is a thing that's going on or that's being discussed or that's being considered, and you introduce a long-standing halachic position that you backdated, you post-dated 500 years, that could be very, very problematic. In Tshuva Kuf Tzadik Beis, he has what do you say? In Tshuva Kuf Tzadik Beis, he has this is more hashkafadik. Tshuva Reshit Aleph is the one that I'm talking about. Mekayim Puru without marriage. There's in Tshuva Reshit Non Aleph and Tshuva Kuf Tzadik Beis. There he argues on the Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikrim, which again he's not the only one to do it, but he writes that Mechatesa these are the Ikrim, and who says, and what about this one and that one, and those are longer discussions about Ikrim and what are Ikrim, what aren't Ikrim. But again, something that was very troubling. In Tshuva Shin Aleph, and this one inspired, and the Precious Mordechai writes about this a lot. He writes that there's no din of Yehareg Val Yavar on the Gimel Averis Chamuris when there's no Bezdin Smuchim. Unless you have a Bezdin Smuchim, you have a real, authentic Bezdin, like from the time of Chazal, then there's the din of Yehareg Val Yavar on the Gimel Chamuris. But if you know Bezdin Smuchim, there's no din of Yehareg Val Yavar on the Gimel Chamuris. That's something that not only is the Halacha not like that, but long-standing tradition in Klal Yisrael is not like that. Meaning that's who knows how many Kedoshim throughout Deiris, or Moshe Nefesh for this long-standing halacha that on these Gimel Chamuris, that's a tshuva there, for example. He says there's no reason for the mitzvah of Netil Sidayim Bizman Hazeh, that's tshuva Shin Chafei. The Seder Tefillah in Rosh Hashanah he alters, which is whatever. It's how it shims with the Gemaras exactly in Shimon Shimon Beis. He in Shimon Shimon Hey, and this one is something that again would seem relatively innocuous to us. But if you pay attention to the undercard, to the theme, he allows avelus for ma'avedas miladas. Now in halacha, the halacha is super machmer on avelus for ma'avedas miladas. He allows that, for example. He's the mitzvah sipur yitzias mitzrayim kol halayla. Again, another very traditional, regular thing that everyone has. That's in Shimon Shimon Zayin. Which could mean different things. Yeah, a famous one, and this one's to circle back where we started from in Shimon Shimon Ches. He allows eating kitnias on Pesach. He allows traveling on Shabbos on like a horse or whatever. Shul kavod abrius for a person who's like stuck on the way or something or needs to go travel. If it's stuck, now this is modes of transportation are becoming available, and these are shilas that are developing. So many of the shilas, and really we could spend. This could have been a series where we could spend weeks and weeks going into each one of these chuvas and what sparked and which ones, who talked about what, and this whole sefer is essentially one long contrast on each one of them, picking apart who said what and when and how. But in the Precious Mordechai is tshuva in tshuva hey, which is not a full tshuva, part of it's cut off or missing. He only says like 8 or 9 of these. Even Chassid Lazar has some of them. Now, what's interesting is that the Sifrei Halacha quote from this relatively simply, and Ad Kedei Kach, like a lot of them, there's no asterisks. They just quote from it. The Chassam Sofer has his asterisks. Most of them quote with that asterisk. The Chassidim were fired up against the Sefer. The Chassidim Bechlal developed into being the bulwark against Haskalah. Like the Chassidim, the Maskilim hated the Chassidim more than they hated anybody else, and that became like a major point of contention. And the Chassidish Rebbes were very against the Sefer Besamin Rosh, the Minchas Elazar, the Darkei Tshuva. Really, the Munkat Rebbe writes he doesn't understand how Reb Shlomo Eger quotes something from the Besamin Rosh without asterisks, without telling you that it's something. How do you just quote it like without telling anybody? Minchas Elazar writes even harsher, that it's terrible things about it. And supposedly the Avnei Nezer, the Sachachev Rebbe, was known to say that anyone who has even a tiny bit of Yerushalayim, I won't bring this back home, would not keep a Besamin Rosh in their house. But Omer Ani, he says that if you have one, you should take it out to burn it afilu b'yom kippurim shechal b'Shabbos. It's like such a, so the Chassidim made it like a mamish, like a jihad a little bit. In any case, it's fascinating because it's probably more than likely a fraud, and in a certain way, it did so much better than other frauds because it is widely quoted. It is a successful sefer with intelligent, pleasant, creative things to say on many, many topics. Mitzad Sheni clearly wasn't so successful because it was never republished. So the Welt moved on from it and considers it to be, a fraudulent sefer. But it's an interesting one. What did he gain? He had an agenda. He had these agendas that he was trying to sneak in. The truth is that it's really a sad story because he was an Eloi who was a Talmud Chacham Muflig, who was well raised and probably could have written, fascinating tshuvas on any topic or fascinating svarim on any topic, instead of being either polemical against, the Kanoim or making works of like historical fiction. He could have probably written tremendous svarim. So it is really like a sad ending. Anyhow, to be continued.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.